Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So today I'd like to go over my Minstrel healer build for the Bard. So firstly I'd like to give a special thank you to all of my channel members for helping me keep my channel going. So let's jump to the powers of our character. We have firstly our at-wills. Which one should you be using? Well, our Capagio, however you want to pronounce it, is our base at-will, much like all the other healers, having 250 magnitude without it being enhanced by any other features. So we would use this power then to just quickly and efficiently heal one target without using much of that performance. As for our secondary at-will, we ideally want one that will do damage, and probably we ideally want one that is at range, as we generally focus on healing allies rather than monsters, so it can be challenging to focus on trying to be adjacent to enemies to use like Reprise. So it could be just a lot easier to be using Fleesh in those in-between times where you're not concentrating on healing somebody, and you would use this in conjunction with our Aurora Fantasia, giving that extra heal whenever you hit enemies, and then also having that extra ability to have its finale and healing for 400 magnitude. Pretty neat combo. So let's move to our encounter powers, and we don't really have two useful ones here. Flourish is nice to buff up, let's say you're rejuvenating Carol, and it will also be able to buff up things like Defender's Minute, and should be able to do your Sheltering Etude. Pretty easy to get this cast off fairly frequently, since you'll be able to reduce its cooldown just by casting more encounter powers on songs. Then we have our delayed play, and I find this very efficient to have slotted in with this Defender's Minute. Defender's Minute then being your emergency heal button of 2000 magnitude, generally gets somebody healed up to full nice and quickly. So the way to set it up would be to go and cast this encounter power, delayed play. So you cast it, then you cast your song, and instead of actually casting the song, it stores it right here, allowing you to press this at one button cast and you'll cast that song. Pretty handy right there. And you will also have the benefit of being able to cast it more often by having your Feat Vamp, which I highly recommend over this other one. I better change this up real quick. And lastly we have Baseline, just to give you that extra performance gain whenever you have downtime. Let's say your enemy is phasing and you can't really do anything. You would just play this, and once you release it, you will gain back that certain amount of performance depending on how long you cast it. Otherwise, you can of course use your Serenade. Definitely recommend it in a trial where you have those tanks which take heavy amounts of damage, or even when you're just in a boss fight and you know the tank will take a lot of damage. So you stick Serenade on the tank, you'll be able to charge it up every now and again. You'll need to hold it down and then release it to increase the effectiveness of your heals by 50% on the target. Duration is only 10 seconds though, but it won't put this on cooldown unless you switch it to another target, I believe. Can be useful, but again, just for trials, and this build is mainly for dungeons where you just have 5 people to heal. I haven't really experienced much in trials, so I don't really want to make a build focused on that just yet. So we move to our dailies. Now, Curtain Call is alright, can be pretty useful, but it's a bit challenging to set up. Of course, you ideally want to have it set up with Blaze Flamenco, Rejuvenating Carol, Wandering Carol, and also your Sheltering Etude, and then you would go and cast Curtain Call, cancel a lot of those, and give those other additional effects. Now, when you're running dungeons, I don't really find it all too useful. It's neat giving that extra action point gain, but in the long term of things, I've found it a lot easier just to be using this Encore to give you the ability to instantly cast another song, whether that be Defender's Minute or your Aurora's Fantasia. Curtain Call is good, but you're going to have to take some practice to set it up, and you're probably better off using it instead of Inspiration, which isn't going to do a whole lot because it'll only affect you and a party member, not your whole group. So we move to the mechanics. It's not much different from a Songblade. We have our roll, we have our tab. However, our performance is now increased to 1000, and we have an additional quick play slot, and we also have our forte the same as the Songblade. Now for our songs. Well, we have Blaze Flamenco, and unless you're running content that's very easy, then you might want to run this just for the additional buff to allies of 2%. It's not much, so I wouldn't entirely bother with it. Generally, I use Rejuvenating Carol and just always try to have it up, right? Duration is 30 seconds. fairly easy to maintain. You will see the duration right there, and it should affect all of those allies, and it will give them that 200 magnitude heal over time, and you can enhance that then with Flourish. Then we have our Defender's Minute, and you ideally use this as your emergency heal button. Somebody's low on HP, you press this or you cast it and they're healed back to full. And it's very handy to have this in this delayed play encounter power to be able to cast that again very easily. Then we have our Warding Carol. Really not many uses. There are a few bosses and enemies that you might want to slot this in to remove those negative conditions, but otherwise not very useful at all. Then we do have our Aurora Fantasia. This one is good for when you're in fights where you don't need to heal all too much. But you can use the ability of just casting this. Let's go into fight and I'll demonstrate. You jump into combat because that's the only place you're going to be able to cast it. They're all dead already. So let's go over here. You jump into combat and you cast it, and then you will have it active. And whenever you hit with one of your at-wills, you can see you will heal over time there. Every time you hit, you heal. And you will heal everybody around you as well. So that can be very neat there. Just give it that extra damage output. It will increase your magnitudes by 25 per hits. And will heal everybody for 50 magnitude. It's quite a small heal. But the benefit is you can use it then, as you can cancel it, to do this finale, dealing 400 magnitude to all enemies around you, along with healing everybody for 400 magnitude. And if it only costs 100 performance, it means you can do this 10 times before you're out of performance. So you can spam this pretty much, and it's 400 magnitude, which is not that bad of a heal. And there is also some sort of a bug where you can cast this with your daily power, like so, and then you have the finale on your tab. We cast it, it should go away, but we can cast it again, and we can cast it again and again, so long as we remain in combat. So you can get that off in a fight, and you can see the amount of action points it gives me. It jumps up there, crazy amounts. You can see we can get this off really often. Now, the only problem is the cast time, and then the wait after you've cast it. And if you're out of combat, it's gone then. So not too great when you're against lots of mobs, but if you're in a fight where the enemies are going to be sticking around for a while, like they're spawning in waves, then it could be beneficial. Just something I figured out while playing. And then finally we have Sheltering Etude, which is decent, but generally you don't want your allies to fall below 50% HP, but this is emergency. The duration is 60 seconds. However, it seems to be bugged, this second part, where if the target's already under the effect of Sheltering Etude, that it will apply a heal, and it doesn't seem to apply that heal at all. When we go in combat, and we take some damage and we go and cast it again, it should heal us, but apparently that is bugged and doesn't work. So unfortunately you can't use Sheltering Etude to like spam that 600 magnitude on everybody just by casting it multiple times. Then we do have our Reprised Carols. I really don't find these too useful. Their effects are too random to really make up for actually bothering to cast them at all. So I just find it's a lot better to be using the Storyteller feat to give that extra damage bonus of 15% to the DPS, and then that other corresponding damage resistance and outgoing healing to your tanks and healers. So we move to our class features. I find the more useful ones are this one, and let's go and heal ourselves real quick. That's nearly 700,000 heal just from Defender's Minute. Sure, why not? What I was saying is I find it better to use this Play It Back, where you will reduce the maintain cost of Aurora Fantasia, and what makes it special is this 20% chance to fire a second time, giving you that additional big heal of 400. Of course, instead of Play It Back, you could use your Mystifying Strikes, but the proc chance on it is just so tiny. And then of course we have our Starstruck, giving the ability to give Rejuvenating Carol an additional heal effect depending on those rolls and the corresponding requirements for that. The heal is okay, but not the biggest, but I guess every little helps. So we move to our feats. Our first set of feats, I definitely recommend using the bottom one here. The top one is okay, but I generally don't find I'm going to be channeling Archipelago all too often. So this one's just better with that instant 500 magnitude, but then you kind of want to wait 5 seconds before casting that again, or you're just going to reduce its magnitude. Second pair of feats, definitely recommend the bottom one again, just reducing the damage you take, I guess also increasing your own damage. You could use Art of War, but again, unless you're running content that's really easy and you're just trying to do more damage, by all means run it. Then we have our Vamp or our Sudden Muse, and Sudden Muse I find is just too hard to time it right, to have to pay attention, and the benefits are decent, like having that increased effectiveness on Defender's Minute or Sheltering Etude by 25%, or increasing the duration of your Rejuvenating Cowl by 100%, or having the next time you play Flamenco or a Fantasia it will cost nothing. The problem with these is they can only proc at a chance while in combat, then they will proc, and you'll have to pay attention to the small text which will pop up on your screen saying like Healer's Muse or Warder's Muse, and then you'll have to cast the corresponding power. I find Vamp a whole lot better, giving you the chance when you activate this delayed play that you'll be able to basically cast it again because it won't clear, and that is a 20% chance. Not too high, but still pretty useful. Fourth pair of feats, definitely recommend a Desperate Finale, giving you the extra performance gain whenever you drop below your 200. However, it is a long wait before you gain this back. The bottom one I just don't feel useful. We ideally would just want our heals to be bigger. Then our lastly, highly recommend Storyteller just to buff up your party. Again, the Gambler is too much of a gamble to be worth it. So we move to the statistics of our Bard, and much like other healers, yeah, it's all the same. Stack up as much base damage for the maximum amount of healing. Then your main stats are your power, critical strike, critical severity, and your outgoing healing. And that's really it. You ideally want all of these capped out as high as you can go, prioritizing power and outgoing healing. And lastly, you're looking at your crit and crit severity. I would recommend prioritizing critical strike over critical severity. It's a lot easier to get a lot of critical severity because our forte is critical severity. If we go and buff up, you can see there we have our power capped, our critical severity capped. Our outgoing healing unfortunately is only 50%. So we'll move to our gear, and there are definitely a few options which I should be having, and this is why I've kind of hesitated to make my build, because my luck is just goddamn terrible in this game. Instead of the Gristro Horns, ideally you would want this Raincatcher's Hood. This Raincatcher's Hood from Hardcore Vault of Stars, and you can just farm the mini boss to get it. That's 7.5% outgoing healing in regards to rating. Instead of the Bone Devil's Ribcage, again you could use this Raindropped Remnant. It would give you 5% outgoing healing when within a full party, another good piece. And you could also use, instead of your arms, these Wrist Guards of Precipitation, giving that extra stacks of power when you hit your enemies. As for the rest of the gear, I'm using for my feet the Greaves of the Light Guard for that extra power, and then for my rings I'm using a Red Eyes Glare. It gives that power, and of course ideally I would have the outgoing healing ring. Again, from the Vault of the Stars, this would be this Grove's Crystal Tears. It would give that extra outgoing healing of 4,500 rating, and also your critical strike increased by 5% whenever you have a shield or temp HP. And if you just run with a bark shield, you'd have that shield. Shirt and pants just get high possible item level. As for our weapons, you ideally want like the Lionheart, but going off the Bard and being kind of a buffer, you then might want to actually choose those stronghold weapons. The weapons that would give that extra buff to your party members. You can see there, giving that extra 2% outgoing damage, healing, and reducing the incoming damage. And this would stack up to 10% if you were in a full group with everybody using these. But even without that, you're still benefiting to the group of an additional 2%, which is pretty neat. We don't really need the 7.5% extra outgoing healing, let's say from the Lionheart or the Celestial. We can generally do without it. As for our neck and waist, definitely recommend using the Trickster's Gift set, giving that extra healing whenever you have a difference between your HP and your target's HP. Of course, you could use the Tiamat set instead. It would give you that bonus like all the time, but it's generally like a 2-3% difference, so not a whole lot. Then we go to our artifacts, and of course you just want the ones that give you the highest item level. That's really it. You could take the Storyteller Journals for a bit more survivability, additional hits on crits, and also giving that extra percentage of power. Would recommend them if you just want that extra survivability. Otherwise, these ones generally do just fine with the 4500 item level, giving that extra base damage equals more healing. And for enchantments, I'm just riding with Azures for my utilities, more movement speed, always useful. Using in my defense, more Azures, could use anything of defense like hit points or your tacticals for awareness, doesn't particularly matter, but defense until you have like 40% is generally the best way to go. Then for our offense, I'm just using, doesn't particularly matter, you can see all my stats are capped, but you could use ideally ones that would give you then your power, critical strike and critical severity. Not really like what I have as assassins, I just haven't really been bothered to switch them out from my DPS build, since why bother too much if you don't actually need it. Those ratings are insanely high. Then for our modifications, we're just using in our gear here the extra critical strike or critical severity and power, and also using in our neck, waist and rings, just I guess combat advantage because of DPS. Ideally you would have awareness in here for extra survivability. And then for our weapons, we have in our main hand, we have enhanced Archipelago, giving an extra 10% outgoing healing for it. And then in the offhand, using that AP gain because recharge speed, let's be honest, is not going to be all too useful, and using that whatever stat, either power or critical strike here. So we move to our race and ability scores. If you want to focus on healing, you definitely want to have the Azimar. Otherwise, a human is fine. Dragonborn is pretty good with additional power and I believe it's critical strike. You could use like a half orc for I believe it's critical severity, a wood elf for an extra critical strike, and that's it really. Just try to take ones that have decent bonuses. Otherwise just take a race you like the look of. No point running a Dragonborn if you're not going to be happy with how your character looks. As for ability scores, you can see I'm just stacking up that wisdom and charisma. You can of course use dexterity instead of wisdom, so as long as you're not capped on outgoing healing, take wisdom, but if you are, then take critical severity. If you're capped on both, then whatever, take your constitution for AP gain and maximum hit points. Charisma is just good for the forte and recharge speed. So we move to our companions. Now I am using a golden bullet pop as my augment to give that extra outgoing healing. It's pretty neat with 7.5% there of that rating from this enhancement. And then we also have our reinvigorate to buff up our outgoing healing some more, and also using the golden bullet to give even more outgoing healing of 7.5%. The Kenku, power and crit severity, baby deep crow, power, dog for crit severity and power, and the Compy for power. You could of course switch out a few of these, just try and get those stats you need. Again, prioritize power, outgoing healing, and then the crit stuff. As for my equipment, I'm just using a bunch of crit severity ones here. Again, just juggle around with what stats you're able to obtain and what you need. You can see it's pretty much all just crit severity there with arcane runestones and one empowered there. But again, looking at my ratings, I can definitely reduce some. Then we move to our mounts, and in my current tab here, I'm running with the Magnificent Inspiration. It'll buff up allies, giving them extra damage resistant, outgoing healing depending on their role, and also buffing their forte, which will then buff up depending statistics on those characters, and also does a bit of damage. There are of course plenty of other mount combat powers you could be using to buff and debuff. Then here I'm just using my Ruthless Efficiency for critical strike rating. So we move to the stable. You of course want all those mythic insignias, but let's be real, they're hella expensive and it will take a while for you guys to get there. So legendary is just fine. So with regards to insignia bonuses, we have Warlord Inspirations just because our DPS loadout doesn't particularly matter. You could just ideally switch those out to Gladiator's Guile, just more of them, more movement speed, better, and 2 Assassin and Covenant to give us more of those offense statistics. Then just with our mount colors, you ideally want one that has outgoing healing, but I don't really have it here. It's currently on my other character, and other than that, you'd probably want one with extra crit severity instead of recharge speed. So we move to our boons. Again, we haven't really farmed out all of the boons yet, so we're lacking a bit. Just try and get all this power, then this crit strike and crit severity, and then it's like Marathon Runner, and then whatever. Just you could pick up these healing potion boons right here. And then Master Boon, you want like Blessed Advantage or Blessed Resilience. And Tier 5, you ideally want like this Forte and I believe the Outgoing Healing. Guild Stronghold Offense, again, it's either your power or your crit. And for defense, either HP or defense itself. And for utility, either movement speed, but this group healing potion boon is really awesome just to keep everybody healed up. Let's say an emergency situation when you use the heal pot, then everybody else will get healed for 75% of that as well. And with the way heal pots have been insanely buffed up, they'll heal for a lot now, especially when you buff them up with those boons. You can see 321,000 there. So lastly, it's just our buffs. What do we use to buff ourselves up? It's the same generally for all healers. Dever Precision for that crit chance. And then for actual potions, we have a Superior Plastic Potency. And we also use our Wildstorm Elixir from the Vault of Piety here, giving that extra crit and also crit severity. And then we're also using Watermelon Sorbet for that power. And we're also using our Forger's Box to give us that extra bit of power. So that's pretty much it for the Minstrel Bard build. Hopefully this is somewhat insightful to you guys and helps you out on healing those allies. Generally, you rely pretty heavily on Defender's Minute for that massive 2000 magnitude heal to make sure you can top their HP up. Otherwise, it's just giving passive buffs over time like Rejuvenating Carol or Aurora Fantasia. Again, hopefully it presented well. If I did, consider leaving the video a like, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.